Hey there, deep divers. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting topic.
Yeah, it's all about LLMs and how they sometimes just make things up.
That's right, it's called hallucination. And this paper we're looking at today dives into how to understand it better.
Right, and not just like catch them hallucinating,
Yeah.
but like figure out why it's happening.
Oh, I like that. So it's kind of like we're trying to be LLM therapists, figuring out their underlying issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the big question is, how do we even begin to understand these hallucinations? Like, are there different flavors of hallucination?
Well, the researchers in this paper actually break it down into three main types.
Three types.
Yeah. So first you've got what they call aligned hallucinations. That's when the LLM actually has the right knowledge. It's just giving you information that's consistent with what it knows.
Okay, so it's not making things up. It's just maybe not giving you the full picture.
Right. Or maybe it's focusing on a specific aspect of what it knows, but it's not like pulling stuff out of thin air.
Okay, I got it. So what's the next type?
The next one is called misaligned. And this one is where things start to get a little messy.
Messy how?
Well, the LLM still has the knowledge, but for some reason it's giving you information that's kind of wonky.
Wonky.
Yeah, like it might contradict itself or get things mixed up.
So it's like it knows the answer.
Yeah.
But it's giving you a jumbled version of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's aligned and misaligned. What's the third type?
Well, this is the one that's probably the most concerning. It's called fabricated.
Fabricated.
Yeah, and as the name suggests, this is when the LLM just straight up makes stuff up.
Whoa. Okay, so it's like it's pulling things out of thin air.
Yeah.
With zero basis in reality.
Yep, basically. It doesn't have the knowledge, so it just fills in the gaps with whatever it can come up with.
Oh, that's definitely a problem.
Yeah.
Especially if you're relying on that information for something important.
Right, like you could end up making decisions based on completely false information.
Yikes. Okay, so we've got these three types of hallucinations: aligned, misaligned, and fabricated. But how do we actually go about detecting them? Is there a way to tell if an LLM is hallucinating?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The researchers in this paper have come up with a pretty clever method. They call it the model knowledge test, or MKT for short.
MKT.
Yeah, and it's all about understanding how the LLM reacts when you make small changes to the input.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through this MKT thing.
Okay, so let's say you're asking the LLM about a specific topic. Like, I don't know the history of the internet.
Okay.
With MKT, you would slightly change the way you phrase the question. Or you might tweak a detail about the topic itself.
So like instead of asking about the history of the internet, I might ask about the history of the World Wide Web.
Exactly. And then you observe how the LLM's response changes.
So what are we looking for in the response?
Well, if the LLM truly has knowledge about the topic, even a small change to the input should throw it off, because it's working with real understanding.
Okay, I see. But if it's hallucinating, it might not even notice the change.
Right, it might just roll with it, because it's not grounded in actual knowledge.
So MKT is kind of like a lie detector test for LLMs.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to see if they're bluffing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
This is fascinating stuff. So did the researchers actually put this MKT method to the test?
They did, and the results are pretty impressive.
Oh, can't wait to hear about this.
Well, they created two brand new data sets to test it on. One with a wide range of topics, and another one specifically focused on biographies.
Okay, so they were really putting these LLMs through their paces.
Yeah, they wanted to see how well MKT could distinguish between the different types of hallucinations.
So they had LLMs answering all sorts of questions, and then they used MKT to analyze their responses.
Exactly. And what they found was really interesting, but we'll have to save that for after the mop.
Oh man, you're killing me. All right, deep divers, we'll be right back after a short break. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, so where were we?
You were just about to tell us how the LLMs did on those tests. You know, the ones where they use that MKT method to see if the LLMs were hallucinating.
Oh, right, yeah. So basically, MKT was able to pick out the fabricated content pretty well, you know, the stuff the LLMs were just making up. It could tell that apart from the aligned and the misaligned responses.
So even though MKT is kind of a simple idea, it actually works.
Yeah, it seems to be pretty effective.
Wow, that's really promising. It's like we're one step closer to making these LLMs more trustworthy.
Exactly. And that's what makes this research so important, because if we want to use LLMs for things that really matter, like in healthcare or education or whatever, we need to be able to trust that they're giving us accurate information.
Right. It's like, would you trust an LLM to give you medical advice if you knew it was prone to making stuff up?
Definitely not.
So this MKT thing, it's like a quality control check for LLMs. to make sure they're not hallucinating all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
But, okay, I have a question. We've talked a lot about detecting these hallucinations. But what about fixing them?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question. And that's where understanding the type of hallucination becomes really crucial.
Oh, so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
No, definitely not. Different types of hallucinations require different approaches.
Okay, I'm listening.
So let's go back to our three topes: aligned, misaligned, and fabricated.
Right.
If the LLM is just missing some knowledge, like in a fabricated response, we might be able to give it more information, feed it some extra data to fill in those gaps.
So it's like we're giving it a crash course on whatever topic it's hallucinating about.
Yeah, exactly. We're basically trying to equip it with the knowledge it needs to give us accurate responses.
Makes sense. So what about misaligned hallucinations?
Well, in those cases, the LLM already has the knowledge. It's just getting it mixed up somehow.
Right. So how do we untangle that mess?
Sometimes it might be as simple as rephrasing the question or asking the LLM to regenerate the response.
So it's like we're giving it a second chance.
Yeah, exactly. We're basically trying to nudge it in the right direction to help it access the knowledge it already has.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got different strategies for different types of hallucinations, but this all sounds pretty manual, like we have to be super involved in the process.
Right, and that's why the next step is so exciting.
What's the next step?
Well, imagine an LLM that could actually self-assess, figure out when it might be hallucinating.
Well, wait. You're saying we could have LLMs that are self-aware?
That's the idea. Like, imagine an LLM that could flag its own responses and say, hey, I'm not so sure about this part. You might want to double check it.
That would be incredible.
Yeah.
It would make us much more informed users of these tools.
Exactly. We wouldn't have to blindly trust everything an LLM tells us. We could actually think critically about the information it's providing.
That's a huge step forward in terms of trust and reliability.
Right.
It's like having an LLM that's not afraid to admit when it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the ultimate goal, right? To create LLMs that are not only intelligent, but also honest and transparent about their limitations.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we want LLMs to be our partners in exploration and learning.
Yeah.
Not just these black boxes that we have to constantly second guess.
Well said.
This whole conversation has been so insightful. I feel like I have a much better understanding of these LLMs and all the challenges that come with them.
I'm glad to hear that. But we've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore when it comes to LLMs and hallucination.
You're right. It's like this topic is a rabbit hole that just keeps going deeper.
Yeah, and the more we learn, the more questions we seem to uncover.
Which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It means we're pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Exactly.
And that's what makes this field so exciting. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to move on to the next part of our deep dive, where we'll be exploring some of the ethical implications of this technology. So stick around, deep divers. Things are about to get really interesting. All right, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this world of LLMs and hallucination.
Yeah. Things are about to get a little bit more intense.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
Well, we've talked a lot about how LLMs can accidentally hallucinate, those aligned, misaligned, and fabricated responses we discussed.
Right.
But what happens when someone intentionally tries to manipulate an LLM?
Oh, wow. You mean like to get it to hallucinate on purpose?
Yeah, like what if someone feeds it biased data or trains it to produce fake news?
Oh, that's scary. So it's not just about accidental hallucinations anymore. It's about deliberate deception.
Exactly, and that's a whole other can of worms. Because now we're not just dealing with a technology that's flawed, we're dealing with a technology that can be weaponized.
Right. So it's like the difference between a car accident
Yeah.
and someone intentionally using their car to harm someone else.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So how do we protect ourselves from this? How do we prevent LLMs from being used for malicious purposes?
Well, that's where research like this becomes even more important. The research that's focused on understanding how LLMs work and how they can be manipulated.
So it's like we need to understand the enemy before we can build defenses against them.
Exactly. The more we know about how LLMs can be manipulated, the better equipped we'll be to safeguard against those attacks.
So what kind of safeguards are we talking about? Like, are there ways to make LLMs more resistant to these kinds of attacks?
Well, there are a few things researchers are working on. One approach is to develop more robust training methods. Ways to train LLMs that are less susceptible to bias.
So it's like we're trying to give them a stronger immune system so they're not as easily infected by bad data.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Another approach is to develop better detection methods. ways to quickly and accurately identify when an LLM is being manipulated.
So it's like we're building better lie detectors for LLM.
James.
This is all pretty complex stuff, but it sounds like there's a lot of work being done to make sure LLMs are used ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just the responsibility of researchers and developers. We all have a role to play in this.
What do you mean?
Well, as users of these technologies, we need to be aware of the potential risks, and we need to be critical of the information we encounter online.
So it's like we need to be smart consumers of LLM-generated content.
Exactly. Don't just blindly believe everything you read. Question the source. Look for evidence. And be skeptical of anything that seems too good to be true.
That's good advice for anything you read online, whether it's generated by an LLM or not.
True. But it's especially important when it comes to LLMs, because they can be so convincing.
Yeah, they can make things up that sound totally plausible.
Exactly.
So what's the takeaway here?
I think the takeaway is that LLMs are powerful tools, but like any tool, they can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to make sure they're used responsibly and ethically.
That's a powerful message. And it's a great way to wrap up this deep dive, so thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding how LLMs can hallucinate to exploring the ethical implications of this technology.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
That's right. There's so much more to learn and explore when it comes to LLMs,
But hopefully this deep dive has given you a good starting point.
and maybe spark some curiosity to learn even more.
Exactly.
So until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.